started. So, yeah, are there any questions about anything, what we're doing, or the discussion board today, or anything? Nothing? Anyone? Okay. I will start today with attendance and I know there's only 13 people, but I want to start encouraging folks to come on time. So I'm going to do it now. And late people will be late. Okay, so let me call your names out. If you are here, please let me know. And trying to get my attendance sheet. Weird. Insert. Okay. Insert. All right, there we go. Okay, so today is the 6th of March. Let me call Alessandro Alessi.
Good morning.
How we doing? Hold on, let me get this. Okay, Alessandro. And all right, people are still coming in. I'll just go in order of the sheet. Syed Abbas.
Here,
Okay, hello. Syed Ahmad.
here, Professor.
Samima Akhtar.
Good morning, Professor.
Good morning. Did Alexandra. David Batesh. Anam Bahati. Melissa Calixto. Let me admit, I don't want to keep people out. Okay, Winston Chan.
I'm here, Professor.
Hello, Winston.
Good morning.
Bin Chen. Bin. Kai Chen. Jirui Deng.
Good morning.
Good morning. Farhan Aram.
Here, good morning, Professor.
Good morning. Brianna Faustin.
Here.
Hello. Steve Feng.
Here.
Hello. Jonathan Gonzalez.
Here.
Oh. Okay. Okay, got Jonathan. June Grant.
Here.
Hello. Minghao Hu. Angelica Laborde. She's been missing in action. Jian Lin. Leon Liu. Elizabeth Maddox. Rochelle Mendez.
Good morning, Professor.
Professor, did you call Leon Liu?
I did. I just called her, yeah. Demi.
Did you also get Elizabeth Maddox?
Okay, gotcha. Demi
Here.
Mullings. Okay,
I'm here.
good. Hello, Cameron Nahar.
I'm here.
Okay. Cameron Nahar is here. Nicholas Neglia.
Here.
Hello, Aquino Olivier. Jenny Perfecto, Shanil Pal, Anna Siddiqui, Wenjin Turabov. Wenjin,
Good morning, Professor. This is Anna. Sorry.
okay, Anna, gotcha. Wenjin Turabov, Jaron Walls, Yiwen Wu.
Yes, Yuan was here.
Yiwen is here.
Yeah, Yuan's here.
Okay, gotcha. Kristen Yip.
Good morning, Professor.
Okay, Kristen. Anita Zhao.
Here.
Okay, and Jinran May. Okay, let me, I'm gonna recall everybody who wasn't here. David Batesh, Anna Bahati, Melissa Calixto.
Here. Good morning.
Good morning, Melissa. Bin Chen, Kai Chen.
Here.
Kai is here, okay. Min Hao Hu, Angelica, Jian Lin,
Professor, can you hear me?
yes, I have,
Miko.
Ming Hao. Gotcha, okay. Aquino Olivier, Jenny Perfecto, Chenille Pal, and no, and I have Wenjin Yi Wen. Okay, who's coming in now? All right.
Professor.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Yuan. I think I just told you I'm here.
Who is
Still
it?
marking me absent. It's
Who?
Yuan. YIWEN. Last name's Wu.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm here too, Professor Jerron Wolf.
Wu. No, I have you in. Wu, you're here.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Professor, do you still take the ticket?
You are
Beachen.
okay. Okay.
Jerron Wolf is here too.
Where's Jaren? Okay, Jaren. Okie doke. So now we'll discuss a little about perception. Those of you who've been coming in, try to get here 2 minutes earlier so it's less chaos. There's a discussion board on Rashomon. I hope you guys have watched it already. If not, it's well worth watching. I think it's the classic movie on perception. And it's also one of the best movies ever made. I mean, it's up there with the very best movies. These lists don't really mean a lot, but a lot of the lists of the best movies ever made include Rashomon. So basically, in fact, it's so identified with the issue of perception that the phrase the Rashomon effect is often used. You can look it up on Wikipedia. Is often used to describe when people perceive things in multiple ways. And I think that is a very important issue for business. In managing, managing is often a matter of multiple perceptions, and we've got to decide which perception is which. One example, I was just talking yesterday to my 3200 class, which I teach in real time. And we were talking about something slightly different, but it's related, creativity. And I showed my students the 20 most expensive paintings ever sold. And it made the news recently because a Da Vinci painting recently sold for 400 million. But let me, and it changes year by year. A lot depends on which paintings go up for sale. Some of the most expensive ones never get sold, so, they're not recorded. Like, the most famous example, of course, is the Mona Lisa, which could probably, I don't know, I imagine it would go in the billions. But if you look at, I'm going to screen share. If you look at like a lot of the most expensive paintings, some like this, and part of the reason I was talking about it is this painting here. If you look at my screen, it was made by someone who taught at Brooklyn College, Mark Rothko, who was denied tenure, believe it or not, in the art department. And like a few years later, his fame exploded and became one of the most famous abstract expressionists in the 20th century. So, the second one they show is this Mark Rothko painting that sold for 75 million, which by today's standards actually isn't that much. So you see some of these paintings. This Rubens sold for 76, but when I showed my students these paintings, and they're all amazing, and to me reflect a great deal of creativity. A lot of students said, well, look at that, it's just a picture of Marilyn Monroe. Pretty much any cartoonist could do it. And some of the things like this Jasper Johns thing, it's like, it looks like a kid finger painted. This I think it's by Van Gogh. This is a little different. I mean, you can see that there's a great deal of imagination in this one. But if you scroll up and you go to like the Jackson Pollock's, who was a New York, he was a New Yorker, really did most of his work in Long Island. And people say, oh, this is not art, this is just like slop. And but it sold for $140 million. So I'm just making the point that like what is art, is in many ways a matter of perception. This by Picasso. And some of these things are like, amazing. I think this is another thing. Oh, Cezanne, okay. And some of these things are amazing, but some of them you say, oh my God, this is nothing. Anyone could do it. Like those Rothko paintings, are just like squares of color. And so I think like, what defines art is in many ways a matter of perception. Maybe your art professor disagrees, I don't know. But basically, this is true in business as well. And the difference, though, is in business, we have a lot of ideas, and what we think is going to be can vary across a lot of people. But in the end, somebody's right and somebody's wrong. So like in the 70s, I didn't really get the idea that personal computers were going to be like really important, and other people did, and I was wrong and they were right, and they became rich and I didn't. So so basically the perception is hugely important. And in business, it means that firms either go bankrupt or they don't go bankrupt. It's also true, like when you're in a company and there's any kind of conflict, how you handle that conflict is going to depend in large part on perception. So somebody comes to you and says one thing, and what they're saying may be true or may be false. And basically, you're going to have to decide what's true or false. And that's really what Rashomon is about. It's about, how the same set of facts is seen completely differently in large part based on self-interest, but it's not just self-interest, it's often our prejudices and our opinions and so on. You know, it's kind of like when Ronald Reagan was the president. He was really old, I forget how old, but when he left office, he was, let's see, when Reagan left office, was 77, and all the Democrats said, "Oh, he's too old, he's senile." Now Joe Biden is actually older, and it's the Republicans who are saying Biden's too old. He's not capable. He's senile. So basically, the perception of who's too old and who's senile depends on your presumption, your allegiance initially, and the fact of the matter is often unrelated to the way we perceive things. And that's fine in politics, maybe. I don't know if it matters or not in the end, because I think we have basically a managed system, but that's beside the point. But in business, it does matter, because basically, if you make decisions based on prejudices or biases that turn out to be incorrect, you're going to lose everything. So you need to constantly double check, which isn't to say that you shouldn't be creative or that you shouldn't come up with new ideas. It's really hard to do that. And when you do, it's important to protect the ideas and make sure that idea killers don't destroy your creativity. But at the same time, you have to ask yourself, is this idea real? And the simple truth is that it's usually not. That, you know, what Edison said is that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. And so we need to like constantly check our perception and determine whether our ideas really work, you know, and that's the hard part. That's where you really have to struggle. But it's also, I'm not saying that original idea isn't the hard part too, because a lot of people are blocked creatively. And the thing is that we need to continually test our perceptions and determine whether they're true or not. And that goes for whether there are creative ideas or whether somebody comes to us and says that another employee has done something to them and there's a conflict and it's their fault. And it's very dangerous to just believe one side of a story. So when you're a manager, you have to assume that there's always going to be conflicts and that there's always going to be multiple sides to a given conflict. And so you've got to balance each side. So in other words, what I'm saying is that emotional reactions are usually wrong. And so the mob rule, let's say, is usually wrong. And perceptions of who's guilty and who's innocent are often wrong. And we need to check all of that multiple times and test our theories so that we come up with the best theory. You can't be a creative entrepreneur without some intuition and without insight, but you also can't be a creative entrepreneur without testing that intuition and insight. So basically, our perceptions are a way by which we organize impressions to give meaning. And it's always going to be true that what we perceive is different from objective reality. And contrary to what they may have taught you in your philosophy class, there is an objective reality. It may at times be socially constructed. In other words, reality may be that everybody votes for either Democrats or Republicans. So if I don't like either, I'm out of luck. That's the reality. It's due to social choice. But at times, reality is not due to social choice, it's due to physical choice. And not choice, it's due to physical reality. So, if you say we're going to do away with fossil fuels, but you don't have a technology that can replace fossil fuels, if you stop fossil fuels, then the price of electricity is going to go up. And it's a simple reality that you can't pass a law to change. There's no way to change that situation. So much of the time, our perceptions are going to be confirmed or are going to be disconfirmed by objective reality. And that's how business is. So basically, there's a difference between that and, say, art, where, if somebody says that Rothko or Jackson Pollock or de Kooning or somebody else is a great artist, other people might say this is just nonsense. It's not great art, and they're entitled to their opinion, and the other one's entitled to their opinion, and there's no real confirmation as to what real art is. I mean, except that people are willing to pay $200 million for de Kooning, and whether you think that's art or not is really irrelevant because the market says it is. So I don't know what to do with that exactly. I'm not an expert in art, but so basically people tend to base their perception of reality on their preconceptions and how they perceive. They don't always perceive what is real. And this is very, very important to always keep in mind. There are three elements that shape perception: the perceiver, the object, and the situation. The perceiver brings attitudes and motives, and the situation has quite a few characteristics such as novelty, and the relationship of the target to its background will influence how we think. So in other words, things like a more pleasant appearance will predict loan officers' approvals of a loan with 60% accuracy. So in other words, rather than look purely at the objective statistics about the person's credit history, much of the time, whether someone gets a loan depends on how they look. The context in which we perceive things is also very important. So when things occur in a given situation will determine how we perceive them. There's a whole set of attribution theories that I think are somewhat useful. First of all, our perception and judgment of someone's actions are influenced by the assumptions we make. And so there's something called self-serving bias. And the idea of self-serving bias is that we tend to value what we do more positively and what others do more negatively. So if something good happens to us, we view it due to our actions, but if something good happens to someone else, we tend to put more weight on the situation. Basically, there are three factors that influence our attribution of cause: distinctiveness, consensus, and consistency. Distinctiveness means that the individual displays different behaviors in different situations, in which case an observer will view the cause as external. So, for example, if there's a fire and you panic, but when there's an explosion, you don't panic, that people might conclude that it's due to the characteristics of the fire because you didn't panic during the explosion. So basically, if you display different behaviors in different situations, people will view the cause as external. However, if you run away in a fire and you want to run away in the explosion, people will be more likely to see that it was internal, that you're chicken, that you're a coward. So second of all, consensus is that everyone who faces a similar situation behaves similarly. That means that if everyone runs away, then it's more attributable to the situation. But if some people run away and some people don't, then it's going to be viewed as the individual. So people will view the cause as external if there's consensus. And finally, consistency, that if somebody acts the same way over and over again, then people will view this as a internal causation. So basically, one of the things psychologists have looked at is whether behavior is due to somebody's personality or it's due to situational effects. And the three patterns that are used to predict this are, first of all, distinctiveness, that an individual displays different behaviors in different situations. Consensus, that everybody behaves the same way in a given situation, and consistency, that an individual is consistent in their behavior over different circumstances. And so if behavior is distinctive, if somebody behaves differently in different circumstances, then it's due to the situation. If everybody behaves the same way in a given circumstance, then it's due to the situation. If people behave one way in all circumstances, then we say it's due to the individual. So basically, this is not necessarily true. This is, in other words, what people perceive. Okay, and basically the idea of fundamental attribution error is also, I think, extremely important and relevant to much of what passes as political conversation in America, that we tend to underestimate the influence of external factors and overestimate internal factors. So, for example, one of the things that drives whether a president gets elected or not is the state of the economy. And basically, if you look at history, Jimmy Carter was the president from 76 to 80, and he did not get reelected because there was a market crash in the 70s. It lasted for the whole, from like early, I think the market peaked around 68, but there were intermittent market declines throughout the 70s. So the stock market was doing badly. There was high inflation and relatively high unemployment. Unemployment was basically, I think, about double what it is now. It's like something like 6%. Inflation was much higher than now. So it was maybe 10%, 11%. But it was a similar kind of economy to what we're experiencing now. And Carter tried to correct it. He made some stupid moves, and I think that was part of why he didn't get reelected. But I think the death stroke to Carter's reelection was that he did the right thing. They finally told the Fed, do the right thing and raise interest rates. The trouble is that when you raise interest rates, it's going to eventually cause massive downturn in the economy. So there's going to be unemployment, there's going to be bankruptcies, there's going to be slowdown in business activity. In short, there's going to be a recession. And Carter he didn't press Volcker anyway. By the time Volcker got appointed late in Carter's administration, he didn't argue with him, and Volcker sharply raised interest rates. Carter then lost the election because of the downturn in the election. Something similar happened to Herbert Hoover in 1932, although there was probably less reason to sharply raise interest rates in 32. But the thing is, it was the Fed that did it, which in turn caused the depression of the 1930s. The Fed had raised the interest rates, and the same thing with Carter. I mean, it wasn't Carter and it wasn't Hoover. It was the Fed. But the circumstances were not recognized. The public didn't recognize the circumstances. They attributed the stock market declines to the president, which is ridiculous. I mean, the president has little to do with that. So, and in general, you see this over and over again. I often see, like, when people post in comment sections or in social media, that they attribute the state of the stock market to whoever happens to be president at the time. And it doesn't matter which party. When Trump was president, he kept claiming credit for the rising stock market. And when Obama was president, he did also. And you know, both parties do it, and it's complete nonsense. So basically, the idea of the fundamental attribution error is that we tend to blame the effects of external factors on individuals. And so we tend to underestimate the influence of external factors and overestimate internal factors when assessing human behavior. So, for example, people blamed Trump for the pandemic, or people blame the Chinese for the pandemic. And a lot of the time you can kind of say, well, a lot of what, you know, people's prejudices come from this tendency to look for scapegoats, or to blame things that occur due to situational factors on individuals. Okay, and so this is what you might call fundamental attribution error. And I think in the corporate world, it goes on all the time. People say, oh, there's always somebody to blame. You know, the market falls, the stock falls, and they fire the CEO. Or the market goes up and the stock goes up, and they give a huge bonus to the CEO. In both cases, it wasn't the CEO, it was market phenomena that caused the CEO to, that caused rather the profits to go up or down. But people will tend to blame these on whoever is in charge at the time. And, you know, this gets into executive compensation. It's a big part of why executive compensation has been outrageous in the past, really since the Vietnam War, you know, in the past 50 years or so, that basically it was determined that executive compensation should be based not only on the stock price, but on a leveraged approach to stock price, meaning using stock options rather than the stock itself. I would have less debate with using the stock itself, because then that would align the executive's interests with the shareholders' interests. But what economists have, in my opinion, incorrectly validated is that it's better to use options which generate greater risk-taking by executives. So we've seen all kinds of mergers and acquisitions in the past 60 years that have greatly centralized the economy and really have done little for true performance, but what have undoubtedly have helped boost the overall stock market, because the smaller firms are scooped up and so their prices are elevated. It may have the reverse effect on the acquiring firms. In other words, the acquiring firms don't do that as well when they buy the smaller firms. In fact, that's what people have studied this fine. But the thing is, the stock market has been propped up to such a degree by the Fed and by both political parties that virtually anything these big companies do is forgiven by the ever rising stock prices. The stock prices have outpaced wage increases by almost infinite. I mean, wage increases have been zero. So, the stock market goes up 15% a year, and inflation adjusted terms, probably about 11% a year. And wages in inflation adjusted terms have not gone up at all. They've gone up zero. And this has occurred because of the Fed. It's all the Fed. And yet, executives get rewarded by huge bonuses, which in turn exacerbates the already unfortunate income inequality that occurs because of the Fed's subsidization of the markets. When the Fed subsidizes the markets, that means that owners do better, and people who own are the wealthy. So basically, this is all built into the system, and this is all attributed to individuals, like the executives ran the firm well. If they were going to really, base the compensation on performance, what they would do is divide the stock price of the company by the average stock prices of the industry. So if you're in, say, the electronics business, you take all the electronics companies, take their average return, and then divide the return of your company by the average return in the industry. And then if your return is below, you would cut the executive's pay. And if your return is above, you would raise the executive's pay. But it should be relative to the industry, not relative to what the stock price was last year. And so nobody, very, very few, there might be a couple of firms that do some things like that, but it's very, very uncommon. So anyway, your book talks about a host of perceptual biases that you should know about. And they all come down to the first one, which is selective perception. And the idea of selective perception is just that we don't see everything in the environment. We see only a little bit, and this is related to autism and other perceptual anomalies that occur. There are people who see things that we don't see. A lot of times you could say, well, somebody who's a great artist like Van Gogh or Gauguin or somebody, the reason they were able to paint is that their perceptual mind, they somehow absorb reality in a different way. And you could say this even more so about, or equally so about the great scientists, that they see things in a different way. Somebody in my other class said that some of the great scientists were autistic. I don't know that that's true or not, but it's undoubtedly true. If you look at the biography of Tesla, Nikola Tesla, the inventor of the AC induction system and the electric motor, which is why the car company is named after him. He saw things in a completely bizarre way compared to us. He just different way of perceiving things, and he'd often suffer from all kinds of perceptual distortions and hallucinations, and when he solved the problem of AC induction, he saw it as a vision in the sun of the magnets rotating around the sun, and it's just like he saw he saw his mother pass him the night she died, and he didn't know she had died. I mean, there are all kinds of these crazy perceptual things in his life story, and you have to somehow see things in a different way in order to come up with innovation of that level. Einstein also, we think of Einstein as a mathematician, but he was actually not that interested in the math, and would often hire assistants to handle the details of the mathematics. What he was more interested in was the envisioning. The theory of relativity was something he visioned, not that he solved it mathematically, but something he pictured in his mind. And basically, we don't often see the things around us, or we don't see the things that we need to see. And we often have a very narrowed perceptual capacity, and that's good, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to function. Like if you saw the movie The Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise, and the story is about this autistic guy whose brother's a kind of ne'er-do-well, and he finds that he never even knew about the brother, and the brother doesn't function at all. But it shows their relationship, and part of it is that the brother like sees things that nobody else can see, but he can't function. And there's a lot of truth to that. There have been cases where, like, there were these two brothers in the 1920s, like, who couldn't really function well, but if you asked them, you gave them any date, they could tell you the day of the week. So if you said like March 22nd, 1432, they could tell you what day of the week it was, and they'd always be right 100%. So how that occurs is really unclear, but there's no doubt that what we perceive is only a small fraction of what is actually entering our mind. And the difference between somebody who's highly creative and everybody else is that they perceive things in a slightly different way, and so they're able to get information that other people can't get, which also may explain why they sometimes don't function as well in other areas. So people talk about the absent-minded professor, of which I'm an example. So I'm not saying that I'm anything special, but such people might be creative in some areas and then non-functional in other areas, and a lot of it has to do with their perceptual makeup. So the trick is if you want to handle perception in a slightly better way, is to try to jar your perceptions somehow. Think in a different manner, or perceive things in a different manner. So I once saw a video about the history of jazz, and they mentioned that when Ornette Coleman, the great 1950s and 60s jazz saxophonist, was first touring, he came to New York, and all the New York artists went to hear him, because they realized that he was doing in music what they were doing in art, and it would kind of jar their perception and broaden their thinking by hearing the equivalent. And you see these things all the time. I could come up with lots of other examples, so basically, selective perception means that what we see is always very limited. And the great writer Henry David Thoreau, if you haven't read his books, Walden Pond and Civil Disobedience, I highly recommend them. He once said this. He said, if a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music which he hears, however measured or far away. And so what he's saying is that it's okay not to conform. And, you have to hear this in yourself and look for things in the environment that are somewhat different from what it is that other people see. But of course, that's all well and good. But then, if it's going to be a business, you have to then, it's not just that you hear a different drummer, but you have to make sure that you can get other people to hear that drummer. That's the hard part. And so you have to, first of all, hear it and then make it into reality by selling other people. And, part of your assignment that I give you with the informational interviews, I know it's kind of scary and it's probably a pain and many of you won't do it. But basically, if you do it and you start to develop sales skills, these are the most valuable skills. This is how you really make money, is through selling your ideas or through selling a product or through selling. So basically, this is the basis of business. So basically, there are plenty of other perceptual biases that your book talks about. And these are all listed, such as halo. And incidentally, one of the big areas where these biases become important is in the performance appraisals that people get in the company. Like those of you who maybe haven't done this before, what often happens is you go to work for a company, and then once a year they give you a performance appraisal, or they tell you whether you're doing well or not. So theoretically, if you're screwing up, they tell you you're screwing up, and straighten up or we're going to fire you. And if you're doing well, they tell you you're doing well. And then most often, the pay raise is related to the performance appraisal. And this goes on throughout corporate America, usually in white collar environments, which is how most people work nowadays. So basically, in giving these appraisals, things like selective perception and some of the other perceptual biases that your book talks about come into heavy play. And so the next one I'll mention, the halo and horn effect, is that often when supervisors appraise their employees, and the same may be true of professors, like there may be one thing the professor really cares about. And if you do that one thing, they'll give you, across the board, good grades. And, this is a common human failing. And so basically in corporate America, let's say your boss really cares about your appearance, and there's one person who doesn't dress that well and another person who does, they'll give a better raise to the one who does. The one who doesn't dress that well might be far more productive, but that's irrelevant. Okay, so this is where a lot of office politics comes in. And you have to think in terms of, how do I please the boss because they have a peccadillo about this or that. When I worked for J&J, I'll tell you a war story. We moved into a new building. They had just built. If you ever take the Amtrak down to Philadelphia or Washington or something, you'll pass by it. It's like a gleaming white building in New Brunswick. It's a skyscraper. It was built in the early 80s when I was there by I.M. Pei, the famous architect. And when we moved into the building, this guy, Mr. Heldrich, his name was, he was obsessed with, he was the executive vice president. So he oversaw not just HR, but he also oversaw all the administration, all the, I think he oversaw accounting too. I can't remember. He had a high job that oversaw like HR and a bunch of other things. And he would walk through the building he would get to work at 6 in the morning or something, and he would walk through the building and check everyone's desk. And if there was anything on your desk, you would get into trouble. So basically, everyone had to have a completely clean desk every morning. When you left in the evening, it had to be completely clean. And this was to him important. So basically, if you had a messy desk, you could have invented a new drug, or it didn't really matter. You were in trouble if you had a messy desk. This is like a horn effect. A halo effect is the opposite. If you were especially neat and clean, he would like you. Okay, so these things go on in big business all the time. It's in socialism, it's worse. So if you worked for Stalin, there'd be plenty of horn effects, believe me. And if you didn't comply with them, you'd get shot. So maybe at J&J you'd get pulled out. But so anyway, there are also such a thing as contrast effects. So the idea of contrast effects is that if there's 5 people in a company, in a department, all of whom are exceptional, and there's one guy who's very good but not quite as exceptional as the other ones, then they may look terrible and get a low rating, even though they're very, very good. And the same would be said, let's see if I can think of an example of it. Think of a good example. Well, you get the idea. If there's a ball team and there's 4 spectacular players and 1 really excellent player, nobody talks about the excellent player. They just talk about the spectacular player because basically it's a contrast effect. Stereotyping means that people often tend to generalize based on one experience or one individual, or they overgeneralize based on a few experiences, or it could be based on a mean, and they say everyone in this group is one way because the mean is that way. And it's a kind of overgeneralizing. And this also is a perceptual bias, and we need to be alert to that. That we often have prejudices based on overgeneralization. As I already said, people who interview others, I was talking about performance appraisal, and I think I also mentioned job interviews, but if not, job interviews are often similar in that the interviewer will make perceptual judgments that are inaccurate. And your book talks about, it's an interesting fact that the first second of the interview is when they make the judgment, and then the next few minutes are just used to confirm the initial early impression. And we all have these tendencies to overestimate our own perceptual faculties. People attempt to validate their perceptions of reality even when these perceptions are faulty. Expectations tend to and the reverse is true, that if you tell people they're going to do well, they tend to do better than if you tell them they're going to do badly. So if a teacher has low expectations of you, then you're not going to perform. But if a teacher has high expectations of you, then you will tend to perform better. So that's why I assume you're all going to do your informational interviews. So basically, your judgments in business, and I've talked about a few possible things. I talked about conflicts being resolved in unfair ways because people are biased by the people who get to them first. Performance appraisals, job interviews, office politics, entrepreneurship, and deciding what business strategy to pursue. All of these aspects of business are frequently influenced by how we perceive things. Some other common biases, overconfidence. People tend to overestimate their own abilities. Years ago in the 1950s, a guy named Frank Knight, who was a famous economist at the University of Chicago, wrote a book, Risk, Uncertainty, and Profit. And he argued that most entrepreneurs have an unrealistically positive attitude about their prospects, and many of them fail, and the public is the one that benefits, because if people had correct estimates of their chances, many of them would not pursue, the number that actually pursue entrepreneurship would be lower because of the failure rate. And so basically the public benefits because more people go into entrepreneurship than they otherwise would, because they're overconfident, because they believe that they're going to succeed when the likelihood is that they won't. And the ones who the beneficiary of that distortion is the public, because without that we wouldn't have as much innovation and we wouldn't have as many new ideas. And so the rewards given to entrepreneurs in Knight's estimation are not sufficient according to this model. That, in other words, part of why we have as much entrepreneurship as we do in this country is because people are overconfident. And if they knew the real probabilities and the real reward system, the real reward amounts, as many people wouldn't go into it. So according to Knight, entrepreneurial rewards are too low for a rational person, which is something to think about. Now, which may be why a lot of people aren't entrepreneurs. I mean, the fact is that most people don't become entrepreneurs. What puzzles me, though, is that people who don't become entrepreneurs are then angry when successful entrepreneurs make a lot of money. They feel, oh, they don't deserve it, it's unfair, it's income inequality. But the same people didn't offer to themselves go into entrepreneurship. So it's a very kind of self-serving bias that, oh, I'm not foolish enough to go into entrepreneurship, but if an entrepreneur makes $1 billion, that's unfair because it's too big. I don't quite get that that equation. If it's too big, why didn't you go into it? So basically, we also have an anchoring bias that we focus on initial information. And this actually became the basis of a law in New York that they can't ask you your current salary. I believe that's been passed as a law. And the reason is that when I was in corporate America, if you were making a low salary on your last job, they would ask you what you're making and then offer you a low salary on your new job. So in other words, your salary on the new job would be based on the salary on the old job. And this is not good economics. It's true that this was an irrationality in the market, because really what your salary should be based on is what you can contribute to the firm that's hiring you. So basically, this idea of anchoring basis, that we focus on initial information, your salary on the last job, is also a bias. We also tend to base our judgments on information that's available, which may not be all the information. And so just because we know something doesn't mean it's true. Yet we'll often make important decisions based on, say, a biased information set. Also, there are a whole host of other perceptual bias. A guy named Max Bazerman has written extensively on how the psychological biases influence people's thinking in all kinds of ways. Sometimes random variables affect something, and then people conclude that this randomly associated variable is a cause, where most people are risk averse. And so they tend to make decisions that under reward themselves. So for example, my mother saved a lot, but she never put her money in the stock market. So the returns on savings when she was alive were probably about 3-4%, basically what they've recently returned to. But the stock market in that time was returning 10 or 11%. But because of the risk of the stock market, she never put her money in. So, she would have had 3 times the amount of money if she had put it in the stock market. I discussed that with her a few times, but she never found that convincing. So basically, we also tend to have hindsight bias. When I was really young, when I was like, say 10 years old or something, I went to my friend's house, and I'm putting on the screen share, and he had like hanging on his wall for some reason, the S&P 500 stock index at that time. And if you look at it, I'm putting it on the screen share. If you look at the S&P 500 index over time, so here S&P 500 comes right up from Google. This looks like it might be inflation. No, I guess it's not. So, if you look at this kind of understates, and this only goes back to 83, but it kind of understates what these declines were. But, I looked at that graph, at that time it was probably about 1965, I saw this, and I said to myself, well, if somebody buys, of course I was only a kid, so I wasn't going to buy, but I was saying, what if somebody buys here, at the very bottom, and then rides up, then sells here, and then buys back there? And I said, why don't people do that? And, it seemed obvious to me that that's what you should do. And of course it is, but that's only if you know when it bottomed. What didn't occur to me was that you can't know that when you're living through that, you don't know what the bottom is. And you only can say that when you look back. So what we tend to do is look back into the past and say, oh, the people at that time were stupid because they didn't buy at the bottom and sell at the top. But the thing is, what's happening now is just as confusing. And so we're making the same mistakes they did. And, we forgive ourselves, but we don't realize that somebody would have been uninformed then about the future, just as we are about the future. So in any case, there are a lot of these perceptual biases, and we need to be aware that we're subject to them. The simple truth is that managers spend about 30% of their time on decision making, and 60% of managers report that the majority of the time they spend on decision making is ineffective. Graham Allison was or is, I think he's still active. I'm not sure about that. He'd be really old now, but I'm going to look. Graham Allison. Yeah, he's still teaching. So he wrote this book, I think it was in the 60s, on it's called Essence of Decision. And he talks about three models of decision making. And they are the rational actor, or the kind of decision making that economists assume, bounded rationality, and political. And basically, the way that accountants and economists think about decision making is that it's purely rational. And so if we just provide enough information, then investors will be well informed. And they're not wrong. In the long term, that turns out to be right. But in the short term, those kinds of decisions are often overturned because of the self-serving biases of managers and the indulgence of the managers. And the simple truth is that in a free economy, if you make stupid decisions, your firm will go bankrupt. And that is a good thing. Bankruptcy is good. You know, this was to me, and again, this is my opinion, the fundamental error of 2008 and 2009 was that firms can be too big to fail. That is completely wrong, in my opinion. And I think our society made grievous self-destructive mistakes in those years by subsidizing massively the super rich owners of Wall Street firms that had been mismanaged and deserved to go bankrupt. And instead, both the Bush and the Obama administrations, and that was really in concert completely, both parties were completely equal, as saying that, oh, the Republicans are the party of the rich, and it's complete nonsense. That basically the two parties subsidized this incompetent, moronic decision-making to an almost infinite degree. There was an economist at Bard at the time who, like a couple of years later, traced all the loans and the different subsidies that the Fed had made to Wall Street and to other large corporations like AIG at the time. And it was bigger than the entire gross domestic product. It was $29 trillion, bigger than the entire economy, went to subsidize these goofy, dumbed down firms that had basically bankrupted themselves and bankrupted our country. And instead of just letting them die the way they deserved, they were propped up and received massive subsidies. Now, who do you think pays for that? It's astonishing to me that the public has been asleep for a century on this. Where do you think that money comes from? Why do you think that there have been no real hourly wage increases for 60 years? So basically, these massive subsidies were given to these firms, and they're still with us. The basis of that whole set of decisions was what Graham Allison would have called the political model of decision making. It certainly wasn't the rational actor model, because I don't think there was rationality at any point in any of that. The Wall Street firms were irrational. They made bad decisions. The state was irrational. They subsidized these bad decisions. Higher education, the economists and universities were rational. They all supported this kind of subsidization, and on and on. And basically, then saying that economic actors are necessarily rational is far from reality. The case study that Allison based his book on was the Bay of Pigs invasion under Kennedy, which we're going to study a little bit when we look at the film The Fog of War, which is a great discussion. But what was it the Bay of Pigs, or maybe I'm making a mistake, it could have been the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was one of the two, but they're both going to be in the fog of war. And basically, when you look at these government processes, they rarely can be said to be purely rational. Foreign policy is often driven by people who are lower down on the chain who do stuff. We may have gotten into the Vietnam War because of the actions of mid-level State Department people who were involved in Vietnam. There were often times when rationality flies by the boards, and I just gave you 3 examples. Well, the Cuban Missile Crisis was, you'll see when you see the McNamara movie, was fairly rationally handled, but the other 3, the Bay of Pigs invasion was insane. The Vietnam War was insane, and as far as I'm concerned, a lot of people disagree with me and say, oh, we had to do it, the economy would have fallen apart if Goldman Sachs went out of business. To me, if Goldman Sachs went out of business, it would be like a successful case of chemotherapy, that we got rid of a cancer that we really don't need. But that's another story. Anyway, we've had a full day today, and those of you who came late, please see me after class. I will let you go. Your discussion board on Rashomon is due tonight, and I will see you on Wednesday. Have a nice day, and if you came late, please stay and let me know that you got here.
Professor,
Yes, Kristen.
are you open to extending the discussion board for 1 day? I have to watch Rashomon.
Okay. All right. Those of you who are still here, I'll extend it for 1 day, and I'll tell everyone fine.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Have a good one.
You too.
Have a
Hi,
good day.
Professor Chanel Powell. I came in at 9:40.
Hey, Chanel. Okay, hold on. Okay, try to get here on time.
Yeah, I also got here late today, Professor.
Is that Aquino? What's your last
Yep.
name?
Oliver.
Okay. Okay, gotcha.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right, have a good one.
Jenny, Roberto also came in
Yes,
late.
Jenny, try to get here on time, okay, so I don't have to.
Yeah, it's just my internet, but okay. Thank
Okay,
you.
all right. It happened to me too, but try to get to it on time. Go ahead, next case. Anyone else?
Oh, Professor, I came late.
Yes, say you should know by now.
Yes, yeah, I'm sorry. I was riding my bike to come to school and stuff like that.
Okay, try leave a little earlier.
All right.
Take care. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, have a good one. See you next time.